Here are the literary heroines who, in their own unique ways, showed the world that a woman's story doesn't always need a prince charming to reach a fascinating chapter. Forget waiting for a rescuer. These characters were busy rescuing themselves, building empires, solving mysteries, or simply choosing their own path, often against a backdrop of immense societal pressure. Did you know that in the early 19th century, a woman like Jane Austen's Elizabeth Bennet had very few respectable ways to earn a living, making marriage almost a non-negotiable career path? Yet she famously declared she was in no hurry to marry. And what about Jo March, who in a time when domesticity was paramount, boldly aimed to be a literary spinster, pouring her heart into her writing? Some of these women, from as early as the 1600s with Hester Prynne's stark resilience to the keen observations of a 20th century sleuth like Miss Marple, carved out spaces for themselves where their intellect and spirit could flourish, often finding purpose far removed from the altar. One character even managed her own farm in the 1870s, a task almost unheard of for a single woman. Another, a governess in the 1840s, faced down poverty rather than enter a marriage that would diminish her very soul. These are not just tales of romance or lack thereof. They are chronicles of women navigating worlds that were not built for their independence, and in doing so, they left an indelible mark on literature, making us ponder the many forms a fulfilling life can take. Number 8. Lucy Snowe, the quiet, architect of her own life in a world that demanded otherwise. Picture Brussels, Belgium, in the mid-19th century. For Lucy Snowe, the protagonist of Charlotte Bronté's 1853 novel, Villette, this city becomes both a refuge and a battleground. Arriving alone and with little money, Lucy is a figure of profound self-reliance, not by flamboyant choice but by stark necessity. Her story unfolds in a period when a woman's social standing and economic security were overwhelmingly tied to her marital status or her family's wealth. Lucy possesses neither. The England she leaves behind and the European society she enters offered limited avenues for an educated but impoverished single woman. Governessing or teaching were among the few respectable professions. The 1851 census in Great Britain, for instance, recorded over 21,000 women identifying as governesses. This was not a path to riches, but one of often precarious independence. Lucy's journey into this world is not romanticized. It is depicted with a raw honesty that lays bare the anxieties and loneliness that could accompany such a life. What makes Lucy's narrative so compelling in the context of a single life is her fierce internal world and her unwavering, if often understated, commitment to her own integrity and emotional survival. She is not actively seeking marriage as the ultimate goal. Instead, her focus is on establishing a place for herself, on finding work that gives her a measure of autonomy. She secures a teaching position at Madame Beck's boarding school for girls in Villette, and later, an even more significant role as the head of her own small school. This achievement, born of her own efforts and intellect, is substantial. In an era when the Married Women's Property Act of 1882 in England was still decades away, meaning a married woman typically had no independent control over her earnings or property, Lucy's drive to establish her own school and income source was a significant form of self-determination. Her relationships with men, notably Dr. John Graham Bretton and Professor Paul Emanuel, are complex and deeply felt, yet they do not define her entire existence. Her connection with Monsieur Paul in particular is one of intellectual and emotional sparring, a meeting of minds that respects her capabilities. When he helps her establish her school, it is an acknowledgement of her ambition and skill. The novel's famously ambiguous ending regarding Monsieur Paul's fate leaves Lucy for many readers as the mistress of her own established life, her happiness and security self-made, albeit tinged with the melancholy that often pervades her character. Lucy's narrative is not a glorification of singledom as a state of perpetual bliss free from care. Far from it. Brontë, through Lucy, explores the profound psychological toll of isolation, the suppression of passion, and the struggle for self-expression in a restrictive society. Lucy battles depression, what she calls the suffocating inertia of her own mind. Yet, her resilience is in her continued striving, her intellectual vigor, and her ultimate creation of a meaningful professional life. She observes the world with a keen, often critical eye. She analyzes the people around her, the societal expectations, and her own reactions with an unflinching introspection. Consider the contrast. Popular novels of the time often culminated in a happy marriage as the ultimate reward for a deserving heroine. Villette offers something different. It suggests that professional fulfillment, intellectual engagement, and emotional self-possession can form the bedrock of a woman's life. Lucy's story does not shy away from the pain and hardship, but it powerfully asserts the value of a woman's inner resources and her capacity to forge her own destiny even when the path is solitary. Her single life, whether by prolonged circumstance or ultimate choice, is one of intense personal development and professional achievement, a testament to a spirit that refuses to be entirely quenched by external pressures or internal despair. It makes one reflect on the nature of strength, which for Lucy Snowe is a quiet, persistent, and profoundly personal force. Number 7. Hester Prynne, forging an independent identity from the mark of shame. Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter, published in 1850, throws us into the rigid, unforgiving world of 17th-century Puritan Boston, Massachusetts Bay Colony. Here, Hester Prynne becomes a public spectacle, forced to wear a scarlet A upon her dress as punishment for adultery. This letter, intended to signify adulterer and condemn her to a life of shame and isolation, paradoxically becomes the catalyst for a unique form of independence. In Puritan New England during the 1640s, the period in which the novel is set, the community was governed by strict religious and moral codes. Adultery was a serious crime, sometimes even punishable by death, though public shaming and whipping were more common. Women, in particular, were subject to severe scrutiny, with their lives largely defined by their roles as wives and mothers within a patriarchal structure. Hester, having borne a child Pearl out of wedlock while her husband was presumed lost at sea, is cast out from the social fabric of Boston. Initially, this enforced singleness, this ostracism, is a torment. She is a pariah. However, Hawthorne charts Hester's remarkable transformation. Instead of being crushed by the judgment or fleeing the colony, which she has the option to do after her initial punishment, she chooses to stay. This decision is the first marker of her complex strength. She remains in a small cottage on the outskirts of the settlement, on the edge of the wilderness, a physical manifestation of her marginalization, but also her separation from the community's stifling conformity. Over the 7 years that the novel primarily spans, Hester supports herself and Pearl through her extraordinary skill as a needlewoman. Her embroidery, though initially sought for its artistry, becomes a symbol of her resilience and even a strange sort of power. The very people who scorn her publicly still commission her work for important occasions, christenings, funerals, official ceremonies. This craft provides her with an income, a means of survival that does not depend on a man. In an era where economic avenues for women were extremely limited, Hester's self-sufficiency is a profound statement. More significantly, the meaning of the Scarlet Letter begins to shift, both for Hester and for the community. Through her quiet dignity, her acts of charity towards the poor and sick, often those who also find themselves on the fringes of society, and her unwavering maternal devotion, the A starts to be reinterpreted by some as standing for able or even angel. Hester does not actively fight the puritanical system with overt rebellion, but her life becomes a quiet testament to its limitations and, at times, its hypocrisy. Her single motherhood is central to this. Pearl, her elf child, is both a constant reminder of her sin and the focus of her fierce love and protection. Raising Pearl alone, outside the conventional family structure, Hester develops an unconventional wisdom and a perspective that allows her to see the inner lives and hidden sins of others with a clarity unavailable to those enmeshed in the community's accepted norms. She becomes a confidant, a counselor to other women in distress, her own suffering having endowed her with a deep capacity for empathy. Hawthorne writes, "The Scarlet Letter had not done its office. Instead of breaking her, it had endowed her with a freedom of speculation." Removed from the ordinary sphere of social life, Hester engages in radical thought, questioning the patriarchal structures, the societal injustices, and the very foundations of the puritanical order. She ponders a future where relations between men and women might be on a sure ground of mutual happiness. While the novel explores her complex relationship with Arthur Dimmesdale, Pearl's father, and the eventual return of her husband, Roger Chillingworth, Hester's core strength is forged in her solitude and her self-reliance. Even after Dimmesdale's public confession and death, and a period away in Europe with Pearl, Hester chooses to return to her cottage in New England and voluntarily resumes wearing the Scarlet Letter, now no longer a mark of imposed shame, but a symbol of her unique journey and the wisdom she has gained. Her single life, though born of punishment, evolves into a powerful, self-defined existence, making her a figure of unconventional authority and respect. It prompts a consideration of how societal condemnation can sometimes, for an individual of extraordinary character, become the very ground from which a profound and influential independence grows. Number 6. Bathsheba Everdene, the independent farmer who dared to manage her own destiny. When Thomas Hardy's Far from the Madding Crowd was first published as a serial in 1874, its heroine, Bathsheba Everdene, presented a rather startling figure for Victorian England. She is a young, spirited woman who inherits her uncle's farm, Weatherbury, and quite remarkably for the time, decides to manage it herself. This was an era when the agricultural sphere was overwhelmingly male-dominated, and women's roles were typically confined to domestic duties or supporting roles on family farms, not direct management. The 1870s in rural England were a time of agricultural transition. While women certainly worked in agriculture, particularly in dairy or poultry, the idea of a young unmarried woman taking full charge of a substantial farm, making financial decisions, and commanding male laborers. The Married Women's Property Act, which would grant married women more control over their own property and earnings, was still being debated and enacted in stages. The first significant act was in 1870, followed by a more comprehensive one in 1882. An unmarried woman like Bathsheba, however, did have the legal right to own and manage property. The social hurdles were another matter entirely. Bathsheba's independence is established from her very first appearance. She is depicted as vain and impulsive, certainly, but also fiercely self-reliant. Her decision to dismiss the dishonest bailiff and take the reins of Weatherbury Farm herself is a bold move. She tells her farm workers, "I shall be up before you are awake. I shall be afield before you are up, and I shall have breakfasted before you are afield. In short, I shall astonish you all." And she does. She learns the business of farming, from the markets to the sheep shearing, demonstrating a capability that surprises and eventually earns the respect of her workers. Her single status makes her an object of intense interest and pursuit. The novel famously revolves around her relationships with three very different suitors: the steadfast shepherd Gabriel Oak, the dashing and reckless Sergeant Francis Troy, and the wealthy, respectable farmer William Boldwood. Each represents a different kind of life, a different kind of marriage. Gabriel Oak, The first to propose is met with a declaration of her independent spirit. "I want somebody to tame me. I am too independent, and you would never be able to, I know." This isn't just youthful flightiness. It's an acknowledgement of her own strong will and a reluctance to easily surrender her autonomy. Her eventual disastrous marriage to Sergeant Troy is a product of her impulsiveness and his flattery, and it serves as a harsh lesson. During her marriage to Troy, and particularly during his absences and after his presumed death, Bathsheba is often forced back into the position of managing her affairs largely alone, further honing her resilience. Pressure from Farmer Boldwood is of a different kind, a suffocating obsessive affection that highlights the societal expectation that a woman of property should marry, and marry well. Bathsheba's handling of these suitors is often flawed, leading to considerable trouble for herself and others. Yet, throughout these romantic entanglements, her connection to her farm, her identity as its mistress, remains a constant. It is her sphere of competence, her source of independent standing in the world. Even before her inheritance, when she is relatively poor, Bathsheba displays a desire for self-sufficiency. Her initial rejection of Gabriel Oak is partly because she does not love him, but also because she cherishes her freedom. She says, "I have a nice little farm of my own," referring to a very small holding, indicating her pride in what is hers. The novel doesn't necessarily glorify the single life as an ideal state free of complications. Bathsheba's journey is fraught with mistakes in judgment, particularly in her romantic choices. However, it powerfully portrays a woman who, for a significant period, thrives on her independence, exercises authority in a man's world, and whose identity is deeply rooted in her work and her ownership of property. Her statement to her workers upon taking over the farm, "It is a new thing for a woman to be bailiff, but I mean to do my best," encapsulates her pioneering spirit. The narrative allows her to be flawed, to learn, and to ultimately make choices that, while leading to marriage with Gabriel Oak, are made from a position of greater experience and self-awareness, an awareness significantly shaped by her time as an independent woman farmer. Her story makes one consider the capabilities of women when they are given, or seize the opportunity to operate outside narrowly defined gender roles. Number 5. Anne Shirley, From Orphaned Imagination to Independent Womanhood. Anne Shirley, the vibrant red-headed protagonist of Lucy Maud Montgomery's Anne of Green Gables, published in 1908, arrives in Avonlea, Prince Edward Island, as an accident. The elderly Cuthberts, Marilla, and Matthew had intended to adopt a boy to help on the farm. Instead, they get Anne, a girl with a boundless imagination and a tongue that often runs ahead of her thoughts. While Anne's story eventually includes romance and marriage, a significant portion of her journey, especially in the earlier books of the series, is a powerful depiction of a young woman forging her identity, pursuing education, and building a career, all fueled by her unique spirit and intellect. Set in rural Canada in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the world Anne inhabits still placed strong emphasis on marriage as the primary goal for women. However, it was also a time of expanding educational and professional opportunities for women, albeit limited. Teaching was one of the most accessible professions for educated young women, and Anne's journey reflects this. From the outset, Anne's singleness is that of an orphan, yearning for belonging and love. Green Gables provides her with a home and the nurturing she craved. But beyond finding a family, Anne's story is one of ambition. She excels academically, driven by a desire to learn and to prove herself. Her rivalry with Gilbert Blythe is not just a romantic trope. It is a competition between two bright minds. Anne's determination to win the Avery scholarship to Queen's Academy and then to pursue a Bachelor of Arts degree at Redmond College showcase her intellectual aspirations. In Anne of Avonlea, 1909, and Anne of the Island, 1915, we see Anne as a young woman navigating the path to adulthood. After graduating from Queen's, she becomes a teacher in Avonlea. This is a period of independence. She is earning her own living, contributing to her community, and continuing her intellectual pursuits. She famously rejects an early proposal from Gilbert Blythe, not out of malice, but because she isn't ready for that kind of commitment and is still figuring out her own dreams, which include becoming a writer. She tells him, "I don't want to be engaged to you. I wouldn't feel free." This desire for freedom, for space to grow into herself, is a significant aspect of her character. Her time at Redmond College is particularly illustrative of her independent spirit. She moves away from Avonlea, lives with friends, and immerses herself in her studies and the college experience. She writes, she debates, she forms deep friendships, and she deals with multiple suitors, including the wealthy and charming Roy Gardner. Her rejection of Roy is telling. Despite his outward appeal, she realizes that a life with him would not be true to her Anne girl self. She seeks a deeper connection, a partnership of kindred spirits, not just a socially advantageous match. Even her eventual acceptance of Gilbert's proposal comes after a period of significant personal growth and professional development for both of them. Anne has published her first stories. She has taught. She has experienced life beyond the confines of Avonlea. Her decision to marry Gilbert is presented not as a capitulation to societal norms, but as a mature choice based on deep love and mutual respect, a meeting of equals. What Montgomery glorifies is not necessarily singledom for its own sake, but the importance of a young woman developing her own mind, talents, and sense of self before or alongside any romantic commitments. Anne's imagination, her love of beauty, her academic achievements, and her ambition to be a writer are all central to her identity. These are the qualities that make her Anne, and they are developed and nurtured during her years as a single young woman. Period detail is also relevant. By the early 20th century, women like Anne attending college were still a minority, but their numbers were growing. For instance, Dalhousie University in Halifax, which Redmond College is often thought to be modeled on, had been admitting women since 1881. Anne's pursuit of higher education and a teaching career reflects these slowly changing societal landscapes. Her story resonated with many young women of the time who also aspired to more than just domesticity. It makes one appreciate the journey of self-discovery and the pursuit of personal and professional dreams as vital components of a fulfilling life, irrespective of marital status. Anne's early life is a vibrant celebration of intellectual curiosity in the forging of an independent spirit. Number 4. Miss Jane Marple, the spinster detective whose power lies in her unassuming singleness. When Agatha Christie introduced Miss Jane Marple in The 13 Problems, a short story collection published in 1932, and then in her first full-length Marple novel, The Murder at the Vicarage, 1930, though written later than some early stories. Living in the seemingly quiet English village of St. Mary Mead, Miss Marple is elderly, unmarried, and often dismissed by more official, typically male investigators as a fussy, gossipy old lady. This underestimation is precisely her strength. The character of Miss Marple operates in a period spanning from the 1930s through the 1970s. Christie's last Marple novel, Sleeping Murder, was published posthumously in 1976 but written during World War II. Throughout these decades, the societal role of unmarried women, particularly older ones, often carried connotations of being on the periphery. The term spinster, while factually describing an unmarried woman, could also imply a life unfulfilled by societal standards. Agatha Christie turns this perception on its head. Miss Marple's singleness is not portrayed as a lack or a source of sadness. It is instead the very foundation of her unique insight into human nature. Having spent her life observing the inhabitants of St. Mary Mead, she has amassed an encyclopedic knowledge of village life, the petty jealousies, the hidden scandals, the long-held grudges, the surprising kindnesses. She famously solves crimes by drawing parallels between the people involved in a murder case and the characters she has known in her village. "There is a great deal of human nature in a village," she often remarks. Her status as an ostensibly harmless old lady allows her access to information and confidences that would be denied to a police inspector. People talk in front of her. They underestimate her intellect, and they reveal crucial details. She is a listener, an observer, a knitter of fluffy woolies who is simultaneously unraveling complex criminal plots. Her method is not based on forensic science or aggressive interrogation, but on analogy, intuition, and a profound understanding of psychology, particularly the darker aspects of it. Consider the contrast with many male detectives of classic crime fiction. They often operate with official authority, scientific tools, or a network of informants. Miss Marple's tools are her sharp mind, her long experience of human behavior, and her social position, which allows her to blend into the background. She is not seeking a husband, nor is her narrative driven by any romantic subplot involving herself. Her focus is entirely on solving the puzzle, on seeing justice done. The world Christie paints around Miss Marple is one where domestic settings, village fetes, quiet drawing rooms, grand country houses become the stages for dramatic crimes. Miss Marple understands these settings intimately. She knows the undercurrents beneath the polite facade of English society. Her detective work often involves piecing together seemingly insignificant details, scraps of gossip, or slight inconsistencies in behavior that others overlook. In an era where women's professional lives were still often limited, Miss Marple, while not a professional in the paid sense, is a consummate expert in her chosen avocation. Her success rate is phenomenal, often outshining the official police force. She represents a kind of intellectual power that is entirely independent of marital status, social ambition, in the conventional sense, or masculine authority. Christie herself, born in 1890, witnessed significant shifts in women's roles. Miss Marple can be seen as a quiet celebration of the intelligence and perceptiveness of women who might otherwise be marginalized or ignored. She is not a young, glamorous heroine, but an elderly woman whose mind is her most compelling attribute. Her glorification of the single life is subtle. It's in the demonstration of a life rich in observation, intellectual challenge, and moral purpose, lived entirely on her own terms. She requires no partner to validate her existence or her extraordinary abilities. Her keen understanding of human failings and motivations, honed over decades of village observation, makes her one of literature's most effective and unique crime solvers, proving that a sharp mind and a lifetime of paying attention are formidable assets. Number 3. Jane Eyre forging selfhood through trials of solitude and principle. Charlotte Bronté's Jane Eyre, published in 1847 under the male pseudonym Currer Bell, presents a heroine whose journey is a fierce battle for love, belonging, and crucially, self-respect and independence. While the novel is celebrated as a great love story, Jane's periods of profound singleness are formative, defining her character and her ultimate ability to enter into a marriage on her own terms as an equal. Jane's story begins in a state of unwelcomed dependency. An orphan, she endures cruelty at Gateshead Hall with her aunt, Mrs. Reed, and then the harsh privations of Lowood Institution. These early experiences instill in her a deep yearning for affection, but also a resilient spirit and a powerful sense of justice. Her education at Lowood despite its hardships, equips her with the means to seek a degree of independence by becoming a governess, one of the few respectable professions open to an educated, impoverished woman in the mid-19th century. In 1841, just a few years before the novel's setting, the census in England and Wales listed nearly 21,000 women as governesses, highlighting this narrow path. When Jane takes the position of governess at Thornfield Hall from Mr. Rochester's ward, Adele, she is a young woman of 18, alone in the world, earning her own keep. Her relationship with Mr. Rochester blossoms into a passionate love, but it is on the brink of marriage that her commitment to her principles, and thus her independent self, is most severely tested. The revelation of Rochester's existing marriage to Bertha Mason, the mad woman confined to the attic, forces Jane to make an agonizing choice. Rochester pleads with her to stay with him, to live as his wife in all but name. For many women of her time, facing poverty and social ostracism, this might have seemed a tempting offer of security and love, however compromised. Jane's refusal is monumental. She declares, "I care for myself. The more solitary, the more friendless, the more unsustained I am, the more I will respect myself." And further, laws and principles are not for the times when there is no temptation. They are for such moments as this, when body and soul rise in mutiny against their Ritter. If at my convenience I might break them, what would be their worth? She chooses to flee Thornfield, penniless and alone, rather than sacrifice her moral integrity and become a mistress. This act catapults her into a period of extreme hardship and an even more profound singleness. She wanders destitute, starves, and nearly dies before being taken in by the Rivers family, St. John, Diana, and Mary. Here she rebuilds a life. She takes on the humble role of a village schoolmistress, finding satisfaction in her work and her ability to support herself, however modestly. "I am my own mistress," she reflects, valuing this autonomy. This period is crucial for her development. She is not defined by a man, but by her own labor and her own character. Then comes another test. St. John Rivers, a devout but cold clergyman, recognizes her capabilities and proposes marriage, not out of love, but so she can accompany him as a missionary's wife to India. He offers her a life of purpose, of duty, but one that would require the suppression of her passionate nature, her true self. Jane, having recently inherited a fortune from her uncle which gives her financial independence, a rare and powerful position for a woman of that era, considers his offer. This financial independence is key. It means she is no longer compelled by economic necessity. She refuses St. John, realizing that such a marriage would be a form of self-abnegation. "I could not marry him," she says, "and be happy." Her eventual return to Rochester is on entirely new terms. She seeks him out as an independent woman, financially secure and emotionally whole. She finds him blind and maimed, a shadow of his former self, but it is as equals that they finally unite. Her famous line, "Reader, I married him," is delivered from a position of strength and free choice, not of a dependent finding a master, but of a woman who has fiercely guarded her autonomy and found a partner who respects it. Jane Eyre's story does not glorify being single as an end state, but it profoundly glorifies the journey of a woman achieving selfhood, intellectual freedom, and moral integrity, while single, often in the face of extreme adversity. Her periods of solitude are not wastes of time, but crucibles that forge her indomitable spirit. It is her unwavering commitment to her own conscience, developed and tested during her time alone, that makes her one of literature's most inspiring heroines. Her tale makes one reflect on the profound strength derived from self-reliance and adherence to one's own moral compass, even when the world offers easier, more compromised paths. Number 2. Jo March, the literary spinster, who wrote her own story. Louisa May Alcott's Little Women, published in 2 volumes in 1868 and 1869, introduced the world to the March sisters, but it is Josephine Jo March, with her fiery temper, literary ambitions, and initial disdain for conventional feminine pursuits, who stands out as a champion of a different kind of womanhood. In a mid-19th century American society where a woman's sphere was largely domestic and marriage was the expected culmination of her youth, Jo March dared to dream of a professional life, specifically as a writer, and even declared her intention to be a literary spinster. The Civil War era and its aftermath, the setting for much of Little Women, saw some shifts in societal roles. But the prevailing ideal for middle-class women, like the Marches, was still focused on becoming a good wife and mother, the angel in the house. Educational opportunities were expanding, but professional avenues remained limited. Writing was one of the few fields where women could achieve public recognition and financial independence, as Alcott herself experienced. Jo is famously unconventional. She is a tomboy who bemoans her one beauty, her long hair, when she dramatically sells it to help her family. She scribbles away in her attic, producing lurid sensation stories to earn money, a practice common among women writers of the period who often wrote under pseudonyms to publish genres considered unladylike. Her passion for writing is not a mere hobby. It is her vocation, her driving force. "I want to do something splendid, something heroic or wonderful that won't be forgotten after I'm dead," she exclaims. "I think I shall write books." Her attitude towards romance and marriage, particularly in the first volume, is one of active resistance. She is bewildered by her older sister Meg's romantic inclinations and eventual marriage. When her dear friend and neighbor, Laurie, proposes to her, Jo's rejection is heartfelt and firm. She values his friendship immensely but knows they are unsuited for marriage, and, more importantly, she is not ready to give up her independence and her dreams for it. "I don't believe I shall ever marry. I'm happy as I am, and love my liberty too well to be in any hurry to give it up," she tells Marmee. This assertion of contentment with her single status and her liberty was quite radical for a young heroine of her time. Jo's journey to New York to work as a governess and pursue her writing career is a significant step in her independent life. She lives in a boarding house, experiences the challenges of the literary marketplace, and hones her craft under the guidance of Professor Friedrich Baer. This period is depicted as one of intellectual growth and self-discovery. She learns to write from her heart, moving away from sensationalism towards more authentic storytelling. Alcott herself never married, and many readers felt that Jo's eventual marriage to Professor Baer was a concession to societal expectations or publisher demands. Alcott famously said, "I am more than half persuaded that I am a man's soul put by some freak of nature into a woman's body. I have fallen in love with so many pretty girls, and never once the least bit with any man." There's a sense that she might have preferred Jo to remain a true literary spinster. However, even within the narrative of her marriage, Jo doesn't entirely abandon her ambitions. She and Professor Baer open Plumfield, a school for boys, where her nurturing instincts and intellectual capabilities find a new outlet, and she continues to write. The glorification of the single life in Jo's story lies in her passionate pursuit of her ambitions, her outspoken desire for independence, and her initial deeply felt resistance to conforming to traditional female roles. She demonstrates that a woman can have purpose, passion, and a fulfilling life, driven by her own talents and desires, not solely by the pursuit of a husband. Attic's sanctuary, filled with her manuscripts, inkstains, and apples, is a powerful symbol of her creative autonomy. The number of young women who identified with Jo March upon the book's publication and in the generations since is a testament to her enduring appeal. She offered a model of a girl who was smart, flawed, ambitious, and determined to make her own way in the world. Her struggles with her temper, her grief, her creative frustrations, and her fierce love for her family make her relatable, while her dedication to her genius, as she often calls her writing talent, makes her inspiring. Jo March made it acceptable, even admirable, for a young woman in literature to parodize her own voice and her own story. She makes one consider the sheer power of self-belief and the importance of carving out space for one's own passions, regardless of societal pressures. Number 1. Elizabeth Bennet, the architect of her own happiness in a marriage-obsessed world. Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, published in 1813, features one of literature's most beloved heroines, Elizabeth Bennet. In a society where marriage for women of her class was less a romantic aspiration and more an economic necessity, Elizabeth stands out for her wit, intelligence, and her insistence on marrying for genuine love and respect, not merely for security or status. Her journey highlights a profound appreciation for her own judgment and a spirited defense of her personal happiness, often expressed while navigating the pressures of her single status. The novel is set in rural England during the Regency period, a time when women of the gentry, like the Bennets, had limited options for financial independence. Entailment laws, such as the one governing the Bennet family's Longbourn estate, meant that property often passed to the nearest male heir, leaving daughters in a precarious position if their father died. For the 5 Bennet sisters, without significant dowries, making a good match was considered paramount for their future security. Mrs. Bennet's relentless efforts to marry off her daughters, while often comical, underscore this very real social and economic pressure. The opening line, "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife," immediately establishes the societal obsession with marriage. Elizabeth Bennet, however, operates with a different set of priority. She possesses a lively mind, a keen observational skill, and a playful disposition. She is acutely aware of the societal expectations, but refuses to be entirely governed by them. Early in the novel, she rejects a proposal from Mr. Collins, her cousin, and the heir to Longbourn. This proposal, while offering her family financial security and a home, is delivered with an arrogant sense of entitlement and a complete lack of understanding of Elizabeth's character. Her refusal is firm and unequivocal, despite the considerable pressure from her mother and the evident practical advantages of the match. "You could not make me happy," she tells him, "and I am convinced that I am the last woman in the world who would make you so." This insistence on personal happiness and mutual suitability in marriage was a bold stance. Her initial interactions with Mr. Darcy are marked by prejudice on her part and pride on his. When Darcy first proposes to her, his manner is insulting, highlighting her inferior social connections and family situation, even as he confesses his ardent, against his better judgment, love. Elizabeth's rejection of this proposal from a man of immense wealth and status is even more remarkable than her refusal of Mr. Collins. She upbraids him for his arrogance, his role in separating her sister Jane from Mr. Bingley, and his unjust treatment of Mr. Wickham. "Had you behaved in a more gentlemanlike manner," she declares, "her feelings would have been different." She baptizes respect, kindness, and integrity over wealth and position. Throughout these encounters, Elizabeth values her own discernment and independence of thought. She enjoys lively conversation, intellectual sparring, and forming her own opinions, even if those opinions are sometimes flawed, as her prejudice against Darcy demonstrates. Her friendship with Charlotte Lucas provides a poignant contrast. Charlotte, older and plainer, accepts Mr. Collins out of a pragmatic desire for security, stating, "Happiness in marriage is entirely a matter of chance. It is better to know as little as possible of the defects of the person with whom you are to pass your life." Elizabeth is dismayed by this cynical view, holding fast to her ideal of a marriage based on genuine affection and understanding. Elizabeth's single life as she navigates the social season, balls and visits, is characterized by her intellectual vibrancy and her refusal to compromise her principles for the sake of a match. She is not desperately seeking a husband, but rather engaging with the world on her own terms, with wit and self-possession. Her lively conversations with Mr. Darcy, even when they are contentious, are meetings of two intelligent minds. Her eventual acceptance of Mr. Darcy's second proposal comes only after significant personal growth on both their parts. Darcy has demonstrated his changed character through his actions, particularly his role in resolving the Lydia Wickham scandal. Elizabeth, in turn, has confronted her own prejudices and recognized Darcy's true worth. Her decision to marry him is thus not a capitulation to societal norms, but a choice made freely, based on love, respect, and a deep understanding of his character and her own. She tells her father, "I am happier than Jane. She only smiles. I laugh." What Austen glorifies through Elizabeth Bennet is not singledom as a permanent state, but the vital importance of a woman's intellectual and moral independence, whether single or married. Elizabeth's journey is about the right to choose, the right to value one's own judgment, and the right to define happiness for oneself, rather than accepting society's ready-made definitions. Her spirited navigation of the marriage market, her rejections of unsuitable men, and her ultimate choice of a partner who truly values her mind and spirit make her a timeless example of a woman who refuses to settle for less than she deserves. Her story makes one appreciate the profound courage it takes to insist on personal integrity and emotional truth, especially when societal currents are pushing strongly in another direction. Elizabeth Bennet's determined pursuit of a life and a partnership that align with her own values remains a powerful and inspiring narrative.